There are certainly problems around the world, but there are solutions. And many of you have the innovation, the resources to help to do that. And with that, I'd like to introduce a group that is a solution here from BlueCheck Ukraine. Jason, Liev, Murphy, please welcome. And I'm also delighted, our moderator from Newman's Own Foundation, part of the original part of CCP, Alex Amiel. Alex, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
Welcome. Thank you. Welcome. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Amiel, the president and CEO of Newman's Own Foundation. Our mission is to nourish and transform the lives of children who face adversity. And fun fact, the foundation owns the food corporation that sells the salad dressing, the pizza, the popcorn. So 100% of the profits from the sales and licensing agreements that come from Newman's Own goes to the foundation, which is me. We're part of a small club. Patagonia is also part of the club. I invite you to also join our club if you want or are able to. Fun fact number 2, as Daryl said, we share founder. Paul Newman founded Newman's Own Foundation, obviously, but also founded CCP to encourage more corporations to give money to good causes, such as BlueCheck. Happy to say, as for those of you who are too young to remember, Paul Newman was an actor, race car driver, and radical philanthropist. And we have a number of radical philanthropists with us today. Some of them act as well. So there we are. I was Antigone in high school, just to say that. So yeah. So I'm going to start off with Liev and asking him, and obviously Jason Murphy, please add to this. Why did you get started? Why BlueCheck Ukraine? Like, what's the story?
Well, I'm really happy that Daryl brought up the generational piece, because if I'm honest, this all began with sitting on the couch with my children and watching this war unfold and our deeply polarized political system, and thinking about my grandparents' generation and trying to imagine what our shared values were and how I could impart that to my own children, that what it means to be American, what the best of who we are is, and wouldn't it be amazing if we could impart that to our kids, that we are still the #1 destination in the world for anyone looking to improve their station in life. And why is that? And is that thing at risk? What responsibility do we have to maintain that democracy? And then watching these, frankly, middle-aged men who look a lot like me saying goodbye to their wives and children. And at that time, we had no idea how resilient and strong the Ukrainians were. I think most of us were convinced, as all the prognosticators and pundits were telling us, is that Kyiv would fall in a week. So this sort of chubby-looking red man, who looked a lot like me, was kissing his children and his wife goodbye, and in my mind was almost certainly not going to return home, but that he was willing to do that. I'm not Ukrainian. My grandparents are Ukrainian, and especially my great-grandparents. And so I was wondering about being Ukrainian. Could I do that? Would I have the courage to say goodbye to my children, to offer my life up for the possibility that they might have a future, not even the guarantee? And how barbaric and brutal it was that in our time we were witnessing something like that. In this incredibly vulnerable state, having just come off 7 years on a television show and not thinking my life has really amounted to much, this guy calls me and says, "You want to do something about this?" And we immediately got into a conversation. Jason was a former director of Doctors Without Borders. Michael Goldfarb also worked with Doctors Without Borders. And Murphy worked with a bunch of different groups in DC and comes from a finance background. So these guys are actually very knowledgeable about the situation. And we immediately started to talk about how we could make a difference. And the gap that we saw was in the emergency response, delivering humanitarian aid. One thing that these guys versed me on very quickly was that this model of localization that I think you just saw in our video, that these local groups are responsible for pretty much 90% of the operational activity on the ground when a crisis happens. And that could be a conflict-based crisis. That could also be a climate-based crisis, as we're seeing from these precipitously rising graph of global aid budget over the past 20 years. The problem is that with that precipitous rise in those budgets, for instance, 20 years ago, it was something like, I think, $5.9 billion. It was, I think, 2 years ago or last year was around $50 billion. So it's really increased dramatically. The problem is that the distribution system hasn't adapted or gotten an upgrade. So as you saw at that humanitarian summit, they committed to 25%. Unfortunately, because of many good reasons, it hasn't been possible to do better than 2% since 2016. 25% is a huge discrepancy. A group that we work with, Humanitarian Outcomes, a few months into the war, published a report that of the 2.6 billion that had been allocated to Ukraine, only around 6 million had actually made it to the local frontline groups who were doing the work. And so the idea was that we would go into Ukraine, we would see who these groups were, obviously because my role in the thing, we would try to find narratives around these groups. We would make short films and we would tell people what we were seeing and what was going on and see if they wanted to help. And we were all incredibly moved by the responses that we got, that there was this huge swell of something that felt like those American values that I wanted to impart to my kids, that Americans cared about this. And it's been a long haul. And people have gotten tired. But I think, and I read some terrible article the other day that said corporate giving is down 50%. I'm curious why. I wonder, is it something about this time that's affected all of us, that there's this malaise? But we've got to stay in this. We've got to show what our values are. And we've got to, if not for us, and if not for the Ukrainians, for our children, so that they know what it is to be American, and that being American becomes something special again. So that's why I got involved. And these guys are really the sort of heart and soul of the operation, so I'll let them tell you more about it.
Thank you so much. And I'm French and British and American now, and my parents were refugees, immigrants, or grandparents as well, so so this resonates as well. What I find unique about this, there's two things that I find unique. It's first an unlikely collaboration of three people phoning each other up, so I'd love to hear more about how this unlikely group of allies came together. But then also, what makes this model so unique compared to other models and compared to other humanitarian aid and international organizations? Jason, why don't we start with you, and then maybe Murphy can add something.
Sure. So as Liev mentioned, I spent about 15 years working for Doctors Without Borders, and that took me to pretty much every continent on the planet. And what I kept seeing over and over again was less and less international organizations, honestly, present on the ground in the most complex crises, and lots of people in their own communities finding ways to help each other with very little help, as that film and as Liev has talked about. And knowing Ukraine, and I also have part of my family came from Ukraine, fled to the United States because of a pogrom in Ukraine, and wouldn't be here if that didn't happen. And so had personal connections with that. And one of our gentlemen, Harris Fishman, who had gone to grad school with Liev, and who I had actually worked on an IMAX documentary pitch with many years ago, called me and said, what can we do? He was actually very involved in the Anne Frank house, which is, carries the legacy of the Anne Frank story, and they were just trying to evacuate their teachers out of Ukraine. And so I currently work at the Robin Hood Foundation on sort of local responses to poverty here in New York City. That definitely kicked in a muscle that hadn't been worked in a while. And we came together with some of our own colleagues, in addition to Murphy, who came into the picture immediately and brought a whole set of skills he could talk about. Also on our board, we're very lucky to have Natalie Jaresko as the former finance minister for Ukraine, and also as the administrator of Puerto Rico, and now as a partner at EY. But our motivation was really, and Michael I had worked with, and between us we have about 40 years of experience in the field, along with Stephen Selinsky, who's on our board, who used to be the finance director at Doctors Without Borders. We just repeatedly saw this story unfolding and knew Ukraine would be the same story, right? Where there was, we talk a lot about that goal of 25%. What is that really? It's actually diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you actually believe that the people closest to the problems should have the resources, should have the agency to respond to those crises, be they climate, conflict, whatever they are? And are you willing as institutions to actually support and be shoulder to shoulder with them? That's really what BlueCheck is about. And we're doing, as the video shows, we're trying to take all the risk out of it for you, all the risk. We've got one of the best law firms in the world. They find out stuff I don't even want to know about the groups that we find out. And we're calling them and asking them questions as a result of that partnership. And they're looking at the front-facing aspect of that through Integrity Risk International, which really looks at what's the brand risk of associating yourself with that. But I'll let Murphy talk a little bit about this amazing model that we built and how lean and mean, really thanks to a lot of Murphy's work and leadership, has allowed us to do this and really make sure that the vast majority of funds that we've been given the pleasure of having the responsibility of stewarding reaches the ground, which I would challenge you actually to ask all of your partners, how much is really reaching the ground? I can tell you, we're getting you at least 90 cents on the dollar. I'd argue we're probably doing better. And the groups that we're funding in Ukraine, we're on email with them this morning. They're on the front line. You're reading about what's happening in the New York Times. I can tell you right now, we're funding one of the groups that are evacuating those grandmothers from Kharkiv, and they need help. And not a lot of people are coming to help them. And those are the groups we're funding. But just over to Murphy.
As far as the origin story goes, my tiny bit is I was in DC. I just finished a large project, and I get a random call from someone who knew someone who knew someone that says, hey, do you want to meet Liev Schreiber and Jason Cohn? And I said, who? I mean, I know Liev, obviously, but this Jason Cohn guy. And it's kind of surreal being on stage, because I was growing up working at Kroger, putting Newman's Own on the shelf, thinking that's an incredible idea, while I was probably watching Liev's movies. But really, we saw this opportunity to have this massive outsized impact. I didn't know anything about Ukraine. I could kind of point it out on a map. I lived in Japan for 10 years. I'm from West Virginia. And when a group of people said, hey, we need someone that has a finance background to make this work, I was like, of course, why not? This is when you have the guy that ran Doctors Without Borders and someone you grew up watching in movies say, hey, let's do something. It's like, all right, just make the right choice.
You grew up watching?
Scream was incredible, incredible.
There's a better way to talk about this.
So what makes the model unique is actually what Jason said, that when we de-risk giving, we try to make everything twofold. We're benefiting our donors by doing this in-depth report that you'd be impressed with if you were going to buy a company in a local country, while also making sure that the local nonprofit has to fill out maybe 10 minutes of paperwork, how to identify them, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and we do all the rest. And as Jason mentioned this morning, one of the groups that's giving medicine to the people that really don't have any other options sent us an email that I had to scroll through way too long of all the people that had rejected them from UN down, and they're just like, we don't have more time to do applications, we need money. And so our system is streamlined where we identify a need, we raise money, and we go out to them and say, how can we help? What can we do immediately? And the goal of it is really to provide end-to-end transparency so the donor that feels like they can't do anything meets someone on the ground that feels like they can't do anything, and it actually connects. So whether you're in Iowa giving us $20 or you're a large-scale corporation giving us a lot more, there's transparency along the way, and as we prove that we're doing the right thing and monitoring and evaluation, finding the data, it's immediately put in with our team in strategic communications and Liev's platform and storytelling feed back to the donors, here's what you did, and thank you so much, and to sort of create a virtuous cycle. And what this has allowed is a de-risk position that has a huge ROI, if you want to use corporate speak. I was also at a hedge fund, so I'd love to do all the nerdy ROIC and IRR, but it really is the time value of money. We had an amazing activation with a video game company. The money hit our account late September, and 75% of it was already in country by the end of October. And then we kept a little bit more because in the winter we know they might need more blankets or something as it gets a lot colder. But I think that's the main bits of what makes us unique.
Thank you so much. And a shout out to Christina, who's in the back of the room, who's our monitoring, evaluation, and learning officer. So she likes all your metrics, your ROI. But I'm sure many other people around the room as well like this. I wanted to ask a question. You have a room here of purposeful corporations, corporate leaders, CSR leaders, foundation leaders, etc. How and why should they get involved? First with, I guess, the Ukraine humanitarian crisis in general, and then with BlueCheck specifically.
I can start, and then I can.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, first we always start from a place of need, and the need is huge, and it's only getting worse right now on the ground, as you're reading about in the papers, and it really is that dire right now. The other thing is what Liev was talking about, which is we have growing crises, both be it political, conflict, climate change. They're all really interrelated, honestly. When I was working on the war in Syria, what predated that civil unrest was actually a very extended drought that led to political instability. Not many people talk about that, but that is the underpinnings of that now 10-plus year conflict. But we've tried to find ways, we've talked about the model that Murphy's outlined and Liev in the film has showed, but we found different ways of collaborating with companies. We've done everything from what was just alluded to by Murphy. We've done large customer sort of activations in partnership with Activision, a global gaming company, through their World of Warcraft platform. We have done very specific employee-led giving. So we worked with KKR, the investment firm, around how employees wanted to guide some of the funding that they had both raised and was matched by the company. In that case, we presented them a number of options. They end up wanting to fund one of the groups that we work on with called Sterenki that works with the elderly, so we can make sure that grandmothers on the front line had warming kits, blankets, heaters, slippers, very tangible things, right? We did cash assistance through Cash for Refugees, where we could fund, for example, specifically groups like widows. So we were able to customize the responses to that as well. And we also worked in partnership because of Liev's relationships with some of the multi-sector platforms like United 24 on generators, because at that time the Russian assault was on the electrical infrastructure of the country. We've also done large performances. We partnered with Elizabeth Segerstrom at the Segerstrom Theater to do 3 days of ballets that were subsidized with the Ukrainian ballet. Sorry, I'm dealing with bronchitis, so I'm going to hand it over to Murphy.
Yeah, I think a huge piece of this, I mean, the geopolitical and socioeconomic reasons are vast on what our interests are as Americans and as American companies in Ukraine. But I think the bigger piece for me, and it's why I said what I said at the beginning of this, was reconnecting with our culture. And I think as companies, inspiring your employees and developing a narrative about who and why you are and what you stand for, the value of that, in my mind, is incalculable. It's to give a sense of who we are, what we stand for, what we represent in these very confused times is so important. And just the feeling, I'll tell you a small example for me, is the fact that my celebrity, which has haunted me, particularly since I first had children and people were like trying to get pictures when I'm getting in fights with paparazzi, and I'm committed to never doing that again because I could see how I would go out on the street and my children would immediately tense up. And I go, oh shit, I've created this energy in them. So now I'm always as generous and take as many pictures as I can, and because I want my kids to feel that. But the fact that my celebrity could serve a function that might mean something one day to my children and might mean something to me is incredibly motivating. Like I've said 100 times, this is 4 guys with day jobs. No one's really getting paid. We're delivering 90 cents on the dollar. We're thriving on what we're accomplishing. And I think it's really, really important that more companies step up to the plate and do that not just for Ukraine, but for their employees. Because I really think it creates a culture that synthesizes something super, super important to who you are as companies and to who you are as American companies.
And stealing from the presentation before, which is great, I'd love a few slides. We could borrow those for ours, but the act authentically, sort of just bouncing off what Liev said, using Liev's platform has been incredible for fundraising. It's also been incredible to get the word out where people don't even realize, oh, it's that bad. But we've also been able to do that with our donors. So Uber has been incredibly generous, not only to us, but in the European app, there was a ride for Ukraine where your ride would donate $1, and they did all this great activation. But after they gave us a grant for the dam collapse, which got water on the ground almost immediately, we gave a grant to a Ukrainian startup that has an NGO alongside them subsidizing people's medicines. So this is a pharmacy delivery app that if you can't afford your medicine, they'll get it to you. We subsidize the medicine. Uber delivered it for free. So it's kind of taking their superpower as a company, which I know, I guess I'll Panasonic on the list, and I love every electronic Panasonic makes, but like using whatever your company's great at with some funding, with the local networks to create the most authentic stories. And I don't know, using the Segerstrom example, from everywhere from local news to high-level news, we were all over the news. Ukrainian ballet comes, they're going to be supporting people on the front lines, your ticket will help other people. It is really doing good while doing well. We don't have to sacrifice any sort of metrics to do the right thing. We're actually hitting all the goals that you may have for ESG and CSR and impact stats and what looks good in advertising while helping people is almost the most effective way possible. So.
Thank you for that. And what I like, going back to this model is not only is it decentralizing where the money is going and how it's coming faster to local organizations, but you're also decentralizing the giving. So in a way, through employee models or even sort of direct donations and getting everyone involved, which is really fantastic, and I think the world needs more of.
And creating networks in those countries so that they can hopefully become self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Ideally, that we can take this proof of concept that we've got in Ukraine and look at some other areas, like for instance Sudan, that are also in terrible states right now.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. That's a great you stole my next question. It's fantastic. No, it's great. Love it. But yes, indeed, sort of this model is currently working in Ukraine, but there are plans for expansion in other countries, or you are hoping to expand in other countries. Tell us more about that.
So, I mean, our first commitment is obviously to our partners in Ukraine, but we think this model is exportable to other places. And because we have sort of a needs-first approach, we're really looking at some of the places where there are dire needs. So an example of that is a place like Sudan, where some of the worst violence in the world is unfolding right now, and where international aid organizations are really struggling to get access, but local organizations are on the ground. They have very little funding, very little access to tap into international funding networks outside of the Sudanese diaspora and other groups, which tend to be actually some of the first funders. Same was the case in Ukraine as well. It's in pretty much every crisis, the diaspora writes the first checks. So we do think it is absolutely expandable. We're also open to ideas of partnership with companies, coalitions, things like that, about where there are needs that we're not thinking about. We're looking to expand really in every region of the world potentially, whether it's in South America, a place like Colombia, where I spent a fair amount of time in some of the areas affected by the longstanding civil war there. Whether it's in places like Bangladesh or Myanmar, who have one of the biggest neglected crises in terms of the Rohingya refugee population that has come from Burma as a stateless population. Any number of these places are places that we could stand up the program elsewhere. And I think our goal also is in how we think about success is, you saw on that film, that 2% versus the 25%. So our hope is also to have partners who could help us stand up programs so we can get our partners, so they don't have a long list of denials from the big international systems. That's our scalability, right? That's where we can take from what you can give, and we can give 100x potentially if we can get a USAID grant. And that gives those organizations sustainability. It meets international goals. It's a big part of the so-called sustainability development goals, is moving resources. Many of you have that in your programs. You talk about support to the SDGs in terms of your global programs. Again, we're not going to solve the problem as one entity, but we're trying to think about ways to scale and love the problem, as Murphy talks about a lot.
Yeah, and I think also reacting to something you said and that Liev also was saying earlier, I worked at Save the Children early in my career, and I was in places like Haiti and Pakistan. They would get huge infusions of cash, and then 2 years later, budgets would crash, staff would be fired, people would leave. What is incredible with this model is that these local organizations are going to be there afterwards and for rebuilding and other things like that. Do you want to expand a little bit on that? And then
We really see it as an all ships rise situation, because these these public funds, they're desperate to help. They're very well-intentioned people, and the reality is, like I said before, it's just the model needs an upgrade, and finding a way to access these local networks and support them is what is, I think, disruptive about what we're doing, and we're hoping, and not, by the way, proprietary about. Anyone can do this, you know what I mean? It's about contacting the people who are doing the work and supporting them. Thank God for Ropes and Gray and IRI, because they really do the heavy lifting, which is the vetting and verification, and a lot of the feedback loop that they participate in and that we create for our donors is also extremely important, so that people know and they can develop a narrative around their giving and all of that. But I think that, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It happens, you know, I just got over.
One thing, the private sector has typically led innovation, especially in the US, whether it be startups or corporate this and that. And what we're trying to do is, as we are a nonprofit, but outside of the government funding realm, give a roadmap of this is possible. Right? Everybody thinks localization is risky. Everybody looks at, oh, what if I send to the wrong person, or what if I do the wrong thing? And what we're saying is that risk is not as high as you think it is, mainly thanks to Ropes and IRI and Jason. And
that was my thought.
For some reason, sending Liev on the ground to meet them was probably, but we've de-risked the situation, and at the same time, we can show the risk is worth it. This is the returns you're looking for from a societal basis, from an ESG basis, from a corporate governance basis. And so as we build this model, Jason and Liev, and we've all made ties into USG and all sorts of other organizations to show our playbook, and then also ask them, okay, we've got this local organization from 0 to 1. How do they go from 1 to infinity? And again, as Jason, I do say way too much, loving the problem. I think Aaron from Intuit's in here. That's Intuit beat it into me for a long time. But we are always focusing on the problem. Oh, this happened. How can we fix it? How can we help? And helping them build up, and then hopefully pass the baton, or hopefully the war ends and they can go back to being construction companies. And that's the other thing, is a lot of these organizations they didn't exist before the full-scale invasion. They were, oh, I need to help my neighbor. And so filling in that gap now, doing the right thing, and then working together to plan for the future.
So we're almost at time. So I'm going to give the panel the last words, but final call to action. What do you hope people in this room will do today, and what do you hope for the future of Ukraine?
Yeah, I'll start. We hope that Yolanta can go back to just running a symphony. She's one of the 60% of the groups that their life turned upside down and they dropped everything. they didn't have a choice. I think everyone has a choice in this room. Like Murphy said, we're trying to de-risk, but at the end of the day, leadership is about taking risk for something you believe in. We believe deeply in these people, the people we're supporting. I also deeply believe in that Sudanese single mom who's running a small little clinic in South Darfur, where is under a city that's under siege right now. And I believe that it is deeply personal for me to not forget her. And to be willing to take risks while I sit here in a very comfortable hotel in an air-conditioned room while she and others are sweating it out and staying as long as they can before that city is overrun. I think you all are in positions of power, and how you choose to use that is up to you. You know, you give the support to us. As I said, into a small room, Murphy and I will drive across the Chadian border, and we'll bring that cash to that woman, and we won't take Liev because of all the selfies he'll have to take along the way. But we'll do it. So what risks are you willing to take? In all honesty, you have 30% of your employees who say they're disengaged. Why are they disengaged? Are you living your values? Words are important. They are meaningless. Actions matter. We are here, sitting up here very comfortably. The people in the field are taking the risk. It's always been that way. It's a question, do you want to stand side beside them? Do you want to challenge your corporate leaders to actually take some risk when we're trying to insulate that risk for you? Because the real people on the ground are taking the risk. They're the ones you're backing. You're not backing us. You're backing that person you're never going to meet, the stranger that I went to help for 20 years, going to places and the luxury of leaving from. You get to help them. You're not helping us, you're helping them. So just keep those people in mind. Keep Yolanta in your heart, because she's there, wishing the day will come that she gets to go back to running the symphony. You know, we'll have others who want to go back to running their construction company. That's it. It's that simple. Are you willing to take risks for something you believe in? It really comes to that. We don't ask you to get on the plane. They're there taking the risk. They have everything to lose. You have everything to gain. It's that simple.
I'd just add to that, there's a lot of noise right now. There's a lot of noise in our culture, geopolitically, domestically, a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation. And I think real leadership is about busting through that noise and showing people what the right direction is. And you are those leaders. And I think it's important that, you know, it's a terrible metaphor, but I just got back from Riyadh because I was supporting Alexander Usyk, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, who also happens to not be Ukrainian. And there was just all this noise around the fight. Tyson Fury's a showman, and it's how he gets inside the other fighter's head. And something about Usyk's discipline and determination and quiet dignity that won that fight for him. And it was incredibly moving to me because Teddy Atlas, who's kind of a fight expert, grabbed me on the side and said, this was a fight about character. And that's something that I feel like we need to impart to our children, is character and what our shared values are. And as I said before, there are a million reasons why this is going to impact each and every one of us if it doesn't go well. But the bigger piece is, why are we doing what we're doing? And I find that that is an incredibly motivating and inspiring feeling once you get into it. And it lifts your whole organization. It lifts your whole company. Thank you.
I agree with everything they said. So radical candor. Reach out to us. I'm the only Murphy Poindexter on the planet, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Just if you have a CSR budget, a marketing budget, an ESG goal, I mean, at the end of the day, money's the only thing that moves the needle with these local groups because they need water, they need food, and they need medicine, and they need a place to live. So anything we can do to unlock budgets, to work together to unlock budgets, to create momentum, that's why we're here. And you know, it's when we did an event in LA, I'll never forget this local guy's name was Matty, and he was incredible. We'd come up with an idea, he'd be like, does it lead to money? We're not doing it, gotta go. And but that sort of determination is, and the great thing about this is you can make the stories that move people, and you can and have an impact all in one. So please reach out anytime, any idea. There's no bad ideas, especially if there's a budget behind it.
We'll try anything.
Yeah.
We'll try anything.
Well, thank you everybody for this, for listening to us, and this, thank you to the panelists, Jason, Liev, and Murphy, for telling us about BlueCheck Ukraine and how to give to local organizations on the ground, how to engage your employees. Everybody can take action. Everybody has a moral duty and a responsibility and character. Everybody is a philanthropist, as I like to say. And yeah, please find out more, and thank you so much for having us.
Seat.